You good to go? Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot for being here once again. Welcome to the People's Classroom at the other side. Great turnout, especially on such a nice night, so wonderful to see everybody. Got a good program for you. Even got my mom to come out this time. I had my dad come out last time. Got my mom here this time, who just told me 3 seconds ago how much she can't stand history. So if I can reach her, then I've really done my job. So yeah, we're gonna give it a shot. But
I didn't have you for a teacher.
Right, so maybe this will make a difference, we hope. But here's the agenda for what we're going to cover. So we're going to continue our series on the modern presidency and the war on the working class, and we're going to cover the H.W. Bush presidency and Bill Clinton's presidency as well. So we'll combine those together. Then we'll take a break in between each president so we can kind of relax. You can grab some animal crackers if you'd like as well. Or if you'd like to drop a donation for the other side, the jar is right up here up front. Or if you're interested in a really cool political platform, the PSL is tabling in the back, so you can get some more information on their political program, and I highly recommend that as well. So a couple options for you. But next week, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about this, but our plan for next week is the George W. Bush presidency is absolutely massive and impactful, so I might break that down into 2 different days. So you can see like the things that you have to cover for George W. Bush's presidency. There's a lot up there, very dense topics. So I'll probably break that up, and we're planning, because my wife and I and our son are going to Legoland next week. So yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So we're not gonna be around on Tuesday. So Monday the 11th will be our next meeting, which we will start covering the George W. Bush presidency, which is pretty fascinating, to say the least. So I hope to see you for that as well. Okay, and as always, you can follow us on all the different social media platforms that are up here. So Instagram, our Google Classroom is probably the best way to stay connected. That's where I post like the video recordings of my lectures, all the notes that I post, all my handouts, all that information is really helpful just to stay up to date with what we're doing. So all that's available for you as well. All right, well, let's get to it and pick up where we left off. Does everybody remember this meme from last week? Yeah, do you remember what this meme is arguing about all the modern presidents? All the same. Are their personalities different? Yes, but they're all just a kind of rip-off of Ronald Reagan at the end of the day. So who we're going to cover today is Nerd Reagan, which is George H.W. Bush, and then Cool Reagan, which is Bill Clinton. But remember the term that we also talked about last week. They're all neoliberal presidents. So keep that in mind when it comes to their economic policies. You're going to see a ton of connection between them, a ton of similarities ultimately. So let's start with George H.W. Bush. H.W. Bush was Ronald Reagan's vice president. So that's how he made a name for himself. He was also a former CIA director, so he's been a long time inside of the government for a while. And then he won the election in 1988. It was an absolute landslide. Does anybody remember who his Democratic opponent was in 1988 that he just wiped the floor with? Yes. Michael Dukakis, who took one of the most infamous political pictures probably of all time, where he was trying to look really tough and like commandeering a tank. It did not go well for him, because this is what the electoral map looked like in 1988. So George H.W. Bush just absolutely wiped the floor with him. So you can look at the popular vote, you can look at the electoral vote, but it was a complete landslide. So yeah, so H.W. becomes the 41st president, and during his convention speech at the Republican National Convention, does anybody remember the classic line that he said, "I will not do what?" Yes. Read my lips. No new taxes. So you might remember that classic speech. What do you think he did almost immediately when he got into office after that promise? Raise taxes. So he, did not follow through on that promise whatsoever. And then I really hope you remember this graph from last week. Can anybody quickly summarize what this graph shows you for people that weren't here especially? Like, the more north you are on this graph, what does that tell you about that president or that time period of that president? What happened to the wealth gap? So if you're north on this graph, what happened to the wealth gap during that presidency? Got bigger. And obviously we talked about Reagan last week, it got gigantic. What do you notice about the H.W. Bush presidency as well? Do you notice why it kind of flatlined during his time period? It's a tougher question, but had wealth inequality grown so much under Reagan that there was very little room for it to grow anymore? Yes. Okay, so that's why. It looks like, he didn't do things that were that bad. I will fight back against that statement here in a second, okay? Because what H.W. Bush does, he continues a lot of the same policies as Ronald Reagan. that massive tax cut that we talked about for the richest of the rich that got cut in half during Reagan's presidency. H.W. Bush continues with those tax cuts as well, so he kept everything pretty much status quo. He was really almost, that's the argument that I'm making, it was like a third Reagan term. That's really what he was doing. But one of the biggest and most impactful events during H.W. Bush's presidency is Operation Desert Storm. So we'll take a look at the Persian Gulf War, which is something that kind of gets brushed aside in history. So I'll give you kind of a good piece of context here so you can better understand what the Persian Gulf War was actually all about and the role that H.W. Bush played in it. So you need a little bit of context, and this is a quick rehash of what I talked about last week. Does everybody remember when we talked about Iran last week? Did Iran have its own democratic government in the 1950s? What happened to Mohammad Mossadegh when he decided, I'm going to actually use all the oil profits in Iran for the Iranian people and give them like land reform and these sorts of basic benefits? What happened to this guy? He's taken out. Remember, he ends up getting deposed in a coup d'etat. He gets exiled, he gets kicked out. Who took power inside of Iran that was much more on board with like U.S. interests and oil interests? The Shah. Yes, exactly. So we talked about the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, who was hobnobbing basically every single U.S. president. So we looked at the Shah. That's what eventually led to the Iranian Revolution, where the Iranian people viewed the Shah as an absolute puppet. They could not stand him. So he was overthrown during the Iranian Revolution. The Ayatollah Khomeini ends up coming to power. And then do you remember the hostage crisis at the embassy from last week as well? So the way that I'm connecting this to the Bush presidency and Operation Desert Storm is this. How did the United States try to get back at Iran for the hostage crisis? And the fact that now the Ayatollah was in power, he was very much opposed to U.S. interests. What could the United States try to do here? Because they did not like the Ayatollah now being in power inside of Iran. It's tough. Think geography-wise. Who might the U.S. decide to become real buddy-buddy with to make life difficult for the Iranians right next door? Iraq. Okay, and who was the leader of Iraq during the 1980s? Yes, Saddam Hussein. Okay, so Saddam Hussein was actually very close with the United States in the 1980s. Does anybody, try not to look at the name, it's a dead giveaway, do you notice who was shaking hands with Saddam here in the early 1980s? Donald Rumsfeld, who eventually becomes Secretary of Defense during George W. Bush's presidency. He was one of the diplomats during this time period, and we had a really close relationship with Saddam and the Iraqis because we wanted to fund Saddam so that he would actually do what to the Ayatollah in Iran? Overthrow them, get rid of them. And that's what sparked the Iran and Iraq war, which the U.S. backed Iraq during that entire, almost decade-long war between these two major countries. And the U.S. did a little bit more than that. We also provided land, sea, and air support for the Iraqi military. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this was a heinous crime. The United States shot down an Iranian passenger plane, which you can take a look at up here. 290 innocent people were killed. 66 of them were children. So we shot down this passenger plane because they thought it was a war plane. We shot it down. And then I really want you to pay close attention to George H.W. Bush's response to this. Because obviously there's an international outcry. The U.S. just murdered a whole bunch of civilians, ultimately. And George H.W. Bush had to respond to those critiques. And here's his response.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are. I will lead her. I will do my level best to stand up for freedom and democracy around the world by keeping the United States of America strong and by keeping our eyes wide open as we welcome change in the world, by keeping our eyes wide open.
Guess what the classic line is from that? It was the first thing that he said. I will never apologize. And you're probably familiar with this term, but George H.W. Bush and pretty much every president I'm going to talk about in this series, they're all American exceptionalists. And if you're an American exceptionalist, what do you believe about the United States? It is the best. It is the most perfect country ever created, and it can absolutely do no wrong. If you look at this cartoon, what is maybe the critique of American exceptionalism up here? Why is that mindset, I would argue, dangerous? Yeah, you're out of step with the rest of the world, absolutely. Yeah, hyper-nationalism basically borders on jingoism, ultimately, at the end of the day. And my analogy is always this. If you think your country's perfect, it's kind of like parents that think that their kids are perfect. If you think your child is absolutely perfect, what is that kid going to grow up to be like? A monster, okay? If you think your country is perfect, it can do no wrong, what sort of country are you eventually going to get? Exactly, so that's what my analogy is, and that's why I think that's a dangerous mindset. You should be able to critique your country when they mess up and do heinous things like, slaughtering a plane full of children, for instance. So, it's no surprise, like Reagan obviously was an American exceptionalist. Look at Trump up there, that's pretty obvious as well. So those are the sorts of mindsets. Yes, I'd say that's taking it to the extreme, but yeah. So end result of this is the Iran and Iraq war ended in a stalemate. But the next major step is this. Look closely at this map up here. Do you see the country of Iraq? Do you see which country is right next door to the east of Iraq? Kuwait. This is what touches off the Persian Gulf War. Iraq, they felt they had a right to some of the Kuwaiti oil fields ultimately because it all ties back to the British and colonialism. The British redrew all these map lines very oddly, and the Iraqis always felt like some portions of what is today Kuwait was actually their land. So they got into this basically land dispute tying back to what the British did. So Iraq decides to actually go into Kuwait, take back some of those oil fields, and the Kuwaitis obviously were furious about that. Now the United States, the role that they played, I want you to read this quote very carefully up here. Because Saddam Hussein, what he did before he actually invaded Kuwait, he did something that I would argue was smart. Who do you think he asked for permission from before he just goes ahead and invades his next door neighbor? The US. And this was the ambassador to Iraq during the time period, so her name was April Glaspie. And this is her direct quote to Saddam when he asked, is the United States going to care about us going into Kuwait? Just if you can briefly read that. What's the clear message there? The U.S.'s opinion is what? We don't care. So what's Saddam going to take away from a statement like that? Great, I'm going to go into Kuwait. So that's exactly what he does. All of a sudden, the second that those boots touch down inside of Kuwait, do you know which country gets super upset about it and then encourages the U.S. to take a stance against Iraq? It's also a country that is very, very close to both of these nations. But they decide, hey, U.S., we actually don't like what's happening here. We want you to get more involved and take some action. It's not Egypt. Great guess. Saudi Arabia. Very good. Absolutely. Do you understand why would the U.S. all of a sudden care about this issue after claiming they didn't care about it? What impact would the Saudis have on U.S. opinion? They have oil. They have the biggest oil reserves on the planet. If the U.S. ticks off Saudi Arabia, what's going to happen back here at home? Yeah, prices are going to go through the roof, scarcity, all that sort of stuff. So you can look at images throughout, the timeline of U.S.-Saudi relations, but that's how much oil Saudi Arabia, they have 25% of all the oil reserves pretty much on the entire planet. So they are a country that you need to pay attention to, you want to be on the good graces of, because they can obviously put the screws to you in different ways. So that's why you look at presidents throughout history. There's Reagan meeting with the king of Saudi Arabia. There's H.W. Bush. There's Clinton. There's W. Bush. There's Obama. There's Trump. There's Biden. They have this very tight connection with Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia tells us to do something, we pretty much ask, yeah, sure, what do you need us to do? So that's what really kicks off the Persian Gulf War ultimately. Now, is this just based on what I described? Is this going to be a really hard sell to the American people that we have to go into Kuwait and save Kuwait? It's probably going to be pretty difficult. How do you sell a war to the American people? How do you pull off something like that to get them all amped up and on board with this war that otherwise they probably wouldn't pay any attention to? That's it. Okay, so I'm going to play you this testimony up here. This was a Iraqi girl, or a Kuwaiti girl, excuse me, who was giving testimony of what she witnessed the Iraqi military doing inside of her country. And she gives this testimony to U.S. Congress to try to encourage people to take an interest in what the Iraqis are doing to her people of Kuwait. So let me play this for you, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
That could grow up quickly. What I saw happen to the children of Kuwait and to my country has changed my life forever. It has changed the life of all Kuwaitis, young and old. We are children no more. My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. There was no milk available for the baby in Kuwait. They barely escaped when their car was stuck in the desert sand, and help came from Saudi Arabia. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after the invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew, who, if born premature, might have died that day as well. After I left the hospital, some of my friends and I distributed flyers condemning the Iraqi invasion until we were warned we might be killed if the Iraqis saw us. The Iraqis have destroyed everything in Kuwait. They stripped the supermarkets of food, the pharmacy.
All right, you get it. Does that sound like the worst war crimes you could possibly imagine? Yeah, what are the Iraqis doing to Kuwaitis here? Killing babies, leaving them to die, like taking them out of incubators. Good Lord, that is absolutely atrocious. Guess what we found out about Naira up here in her testimony? Yeah, do you know what she actually was? Yeah, she was the daughter of the Canadian ambassador to Kuwait. She was put up to this, and it's obvious. Why would she be put up to saying something like this in front of U.S. Congress and C-SPAN filming it, etc.? Probably, is it very effective testimony? Yeah, and what is it designed to do? Enrage people. And oh my God, the Iraqis, they are pure evil. We have to go in and stop them. Okay, and people didn't realize or notice this until years later that this came out, that this was all garbage testimony, but it worked. Okay, this did amp up the American public. And before you know it, you start to see newspapers. What's the clear message here? We got to go fight them. That's what we need to do. So, this is again fairly obvious, but have we seen this throughout U.S. history, the government lying to people to get them all amped up for a war? Yeah, and I think I asked a couple weeks ago, can you give me a couple of classic examples of this throughout U.S. history? Exact same thing that I just showed you for the Persian Gulf War. Yep, so WMDs, obviously. You go back to the Spanish-American War and the sinking of the Maine, which was blamed on the Spanish. It was actually just spontaneous combustion, but that's fine. The Lusitania, the story of the Lusitania gets us involved in World War I. The Gulf of Tonkin gets us involved in Vietnam, of course, and then obviously weapons of mass destruction for the more modern day Iraq War. So the big thing that I want to critique here, I love this quote from Noam Chomsky, but I think it's appropriate. What does the U.S. media seem to do when the government pitches that there's some war that we need to go and fight? They just push it, okay? They just fall right in line. They don't critically think, they don't question it, they fall in lockstep, and the American public falls for it every single time. So that's what ends up happening. That's the start of the Persian Gulf War in 1991. And, I mean, you can take a look at some of the pictures that I have, so that's fairly obvious, but there's some horrific things that happened during the Persian Gulf War. It was only a 6-month war, so it was very brief when you look at, like American history standards, ultimately. But you can look at some of the horrific things that happened during the Persian Gulf War. One of the worst war crimes that you're, taking a look at here, obviously, is what did the U.S. Military do? Yeah, mixed up, exactly, and just bombed a baby formula factory ultimately. So, stuff like that was taking place. And then this is probably the worst atrocity during the Persian Gulf War. The Iraqis were defeated quite quickly during the war itself, and they got a UN resolution to actually retreat peacefully. The U.S. military was not supposed to fire on them. None of this was supposed to happen. And ultimately what ends up taking place is as they are retreating from Kuwait back into Iraq, this became known as the Highway of Death. The U.S. military just decided to open fire on these people that were retreating back to their country or just trying to seek refuge and safety. They wiped the floor with basically every single person that had the right to peacefully return back to their country during this time period. So 1,000 people were slaughtered by the U.S. military along the Highway of Death. This is a tough one. Does anybody know the name of the U.S. general who gave the order to open fire on these innocent people? He became fairly famous. Yes, Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf, whose name might ring a bell for a couple of you. But these are the images of the things that we saw as a result of the Highway of Death. However, here's how it was pitched to the American people when this atrocity happened. What did Schwarzkopf claim? Who did we kill? Rapists, murderers, thugs. Who cares about these people? And investigative journalists actually did a little bit more deep dive into this. And who did we actually end up killing instead? Refugees, civilians, you name it. It was, absolutely atrocious. And the name of the muckraking journalist who actually did this work, you might remember his name. He actually played a huge role in exposing the My Lai massacre during Vietnam, is Seymour Hersh. So he exposed just how bad the Highway of Death actually was, and he's one of the few journalists that actually did his job during this time period and exposed the war crimes that were committed here. So that's Seymour Hersh is still alive. He's like almost 100 at this point, so it's pretty impressive that he's been able to do this. So he's a legendary journalist. So that's Seymour Hersh. All right, this is, again, fairly obvious, but do you think the U.S. Military had any sort of accountability for their actions along the Highway of Death? None whatsoever. So there was nothing that happened when it came to that. There was no, war crime trial in The Hague, nothing along those lines. They pretty much just got away with it. And instead, do you know what has actually ended up happening with the Highway of Death story? Do you think most Americans know about this? No, and it's even worse than that. And this is one of the biggest points that I want to stress that I don't think a lot of people are super familiar with, is this. There's a couple of you, especially a couple of my former students will at least know what I'm talking about up here. I hope you at least have heard the name of the video game Call of Duty. It's probably the most popular video game on the planet, always one of the best sellers. And they came out with a version of this in 2019 where the single player campaign is actually you as a soldier playing through the Persian Gulf War. Okay, so you get kind of a perspective of what the Persian Gulf War is all about as an American soldier. They actually have you play through a level where you experience the Highway of Death. However, read what I have up here. They say in this video game it was not the Americans that opened fire on the Highway of Death. Who was it instead? It was the Russians. It was the Russians that actually committed this crime. Can you just take a second and think, why is that incredibly dangerous to do something like that in a video game?
Because it spreads that word.
It spreads that, and it's spreading it to who? Who buys this stuff? Kids. They're going to grow up, they're going to think, oh, it wasn't the U.S. that did that, it was the evil Russians that actually committed this atrocity. So they're going to be completely out of the know when it comes to what actually took place up here. And it gets to a deeper issue, though, and this is really, again, one of the biggest things I want to try to stress to everyone. How is this possible in today's America? How can these seemingly common historical facts be altered and the perceptions ultimately change and the truth gets completely convoluted and lost? Yes, very good. And there's a term for that. It's called the military entertainment complex. I think everybody's heard of the military-industrial complex. This is a little bit different. The very simple definition that I have up here is this. It's the cooperation between the U.S. military and entertainment industries to their mutual benefit, especially in the field of cinema, video games, virtual reality, TV shows, any other types of media. And this is the stuff that, like I said, is not super well known. If any entertainment studio wants to have the U.S. military being portrayed in their game, or in their movie or in their TV show, who does that script have to get the approval of first? The State Department. They got to go through the DOD, they got to go through the CIA. Do you think those scripts might change if they have the ability to alter them? Of course. Okay, and I'll give you a couple classic examples, but there's been, according to a recent documentary, 2,500 different pieces of media that have been altered by the CIA, by the Department of Defense. That obviously has an impact. So, when do you think this really started to become an issue? Because I'll tell you this, it did start in the 1940s during the Second Red Scare, but when do you think the military entertainment complex really started to ramp up and become a widespread issue? It's not after Vietnam, great guess. It's after 9/11, you got it. So there's a couple books on that if you want to take a deeper dive into it, but you can see how the Motion Picture Association of America met with the Bush administration after 9/11 and said, don't worry, we will make sure that we portray the U.S. in a very positive light moving forward in all of our major media. So you can see that connection between these two, massive pillars of U.S. culture, ultimately. So you might recognize some of the names of these movies that have gone through this propaganda machine. Is there at least a movie or two that you recognize up here? Yeah, Indiana Jones. Yeah, you got one. That's good. Yeah, Apollo 13, absolutely. There's a few others up here. There's more recent ones as well, like the latest Wonder Woman movie that came out in 2020. Went through this kind of propaganda process. But probably the easiest example, I hope everybody remembers the movie Top Gun. So Top Gun came out with a sequel called Top Gun Maverick a couple years ago, but they took the propaganda, I think, to the next level. Because what did the U.S. Air Force reserve the right to do inside of movie theaters to connect to Top Gun Maverick? Recruiting. They're actively recruiting inside of the movie theaters. So that's how deep this connection actually goes. And like I said, I don't think a lot of Americans understand the media that they're actually consuming and the way that the government actually has a pretty tight control over some of those mainstream outlets. So you go back, Rambo 3 was completely dominated by the DoD. But even more modernly, everybody's at least somewhat familiar with the Marvel films, the most popular films on the planet. They go through the exact same process because the U.S. military is portrayed in them, and they always come out looking squeaky clean at the end, when Wonder Woman's no different. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, the point that I want to make is, why is this incredibly dangerous to the culture as a whole? Yeah, it distorts, it brainwashes, does all those very damning things, and people don't realize what they're actually consuming. So last thing here on the Persian Gulf War, the end result of this was a lot of Iraqis were ultimately killed. A smaller number of U.S. troops, like I said, it was only about a 6-month war. But after this, there's some massive effects. So let's start with this. How did the U.S. start to feel about Iraq and Saddam Hussein after the Persian Gulf War? Hated him. Okay, he was public enemy number one. And then they take it a step further, though. What could the U.S. do to Saddam and the Iraqi regime to make life incredibly difficult for them moving forward? Sanctions. Yes, and if you are not familiar with the term sanctions, can anybody maybe summarize what that actually means? What does the U.S. do if they're sanctioning another country, which is what happened to Iraq after the Persian Gulf War? Stop all trade. And if
Hold of their accounts to this country,
you got it. That's perfect. And what if, let's say the French wanted to trade with the Iraqis? What will the U.S. then do to the French? Then we're going to cut you off as well. It's like bullying. It's just classic intimidation. So the end result of this is pretty bad. The Iraqis basically lose control of their economy. Hyperinflation starts to set in. Food shortages start to set in. It gets about as bad as you can possibly expect. So sanctions, to me, is a just different form of warfare. So we're trying to starve them out, basically, so that we have regime change inside of the country. And then, flash forward, I want to play you this clip. Does at least a few of you remember Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State? So she was questioned about this, how do you feel about the impact that sanctions are having on the Iraqi civilians? And this is her response.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
If you have any semblance of a soul, why is that incredibly disturbing? She's just saying what? What's worth the price? 500,000 children, whatever, just throw them away, we don't care. Okay, again, gives you a deep insight into the mindset of the U.S. government during all this. All right, why don't we take a 10-minute break right now, and then we'll come back and I'll cover the Clinton presidency. And the last thing that I just want to explain to you real quick is what I'm going to end with is I want to take a deep dive into modern-day school shootings, because during the Clinton presidency was the Columbine shooting, and that I think will be something that everyone will take something away from. So we'll close with that. It's a dark topic, but it's an important topic. But we'll go through the Clinton presidency. But if you guys want to take a break for 10 minutes, again, you can leave a donation up here for the other side. If you want to meet the PSL in the back to learn more about their political platform, that'd be great. But we'll come back about 6:45, okay? Yeah, please, excuse me. All right, thanks a lot for sticking around, everybody. Let's go through the Bill Clinton presidency. So Clinton, I'll skip over some of the finer details. You might remember Ross Perot, who ran as a third-party candidate in the 1992 election, but End result of this is Bill Clinton ends up winning. It was a fairly close election, and Ross Perot, as a third-party candidate, actually won a ton of votes. So it was, it was fairly close. But end result is Bill Clinton and his vice president, Al Gore, end up becoming president and vice president in 1992. And they were from the Democratic Party. They defeated the incumbent H.W. Bush of the Republican Party. But I do want to just take a second and quickly show you this political spectrum, which I think is very, very accurate. Like, where would well, you can just read up here, hopefully you can see it, but what do you notice about Democrats and Republicans or liberals and conservatives on an actual, more accurate political spectrum?
They're all right-wing or center-right.
Yeah, they're all like center-right. Like, liberals obviously are better when it comes to social policy, but when you're talking about base-level economic policy, they're pretty much in lockstep with each other. They are all neoliberals. They're all capitalists at the end of the day. So that's the thing that truly unites them. So yes, there are some social differences that are important to point out, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking about base economic policy, I love this meme. What are we made to believe about Democrats and Republicans, and what is it actually in reality? Yeah, you think that Democrats and Republicans are like at each other's throats, but who are they really waging war on at the end of the day? The working class. Like, they're united as when you talk about their economic policy. So here's a Simpsons meme, but the U.S. has been moving right for decades because both the Democratic and Republican parties are technically right-wing parties. If you look on the international stage, where the Democrats would be located would be a center-right political party when you look at their actual policies, not the way that they're portrayed in the media. So just please keep that in mind. It's really important to understand and take away from the lesson today. All right, so Clinton ends up becoming our 42nd president. I'm dubbing him Cool Reagan. He went on the Arsenio Hall show in 1992 and played saxophone, so everyone was like, wow, this guy's awesome. Doesn't take much sometimes to convince the American public. But end result of the Clinton presidency, I'll go through a couple just key points when it comes to his actual policies. He was a neoliberal. If you look at the list up here, do you notice a lot of similarities with both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush? What are a few things that you can point to that's like, wow, this is exactly like Ronald Reagan, just with a different political party now? Trickle-down economics, increased military spending, cutting welfare, same sort of policies when you get to those base-level things as Ronald Reagan. The one thing you can give Clinton credit for, because I don't want this to be just completely negative, the one thing that Bill Clinton is at least credited with doing, he's the last president to actually have what when it comes to the federal budget? He had a surplus. Do you know how he actually did that? Great question. He raised taxes, but like barely raised taxes on the rich. But even just barely raising taxes on the rich, we're talking like 3 percentage points on them. He was able to create more revenue and actually create a federal surplus. So you think about that compared to like what FDR did back during the 1930s and 40s. If we continued to do that, we would have a lot of money to actually fund some of these necessary, basic social programs that we would all love to have. So Bill Clinton just doing this very, very minor thing. And you know how he was labeled by Republicans during this time period for just wanting to raise taxes like 3%? He's a left-wing radical communist, and he barely raised taxes, okay? But that's how he got painted. Now, for some of the more negative aspects and the neoliberal aspects, though, of Bill Clinton, the Glass-Steagall Act was something that FDR put into place during the 1930s to stop banks from doing very risky things with people's investments and investing it in the stock market. FDR basically set up this wall between the commercial side of the bank and the investment side of the bank, which meant your money was secured inside of a bank. Bill Clinton was the president who officially repealed Glass-Steagall. He did away with that and put things right back to the way that they were prior to the Great Depression. So this was the GLBA, was the official name of the act in 1999, but it totally wiped out Glass-Steagall. And what a lot of economists point to is this is kind of the moment that laid the groundwork for the Great Recession in 2008. So his policies had a direct impact on that economic catastrophe that we experienced, just a short while ago. And that's why when you take a look at Clinton's presidency, yes, he did raise taxes on the rich, but all his other policies, what do you notice when you go back to this graph that I've been showing you multiple times? Third highest. Okay, so yeah, he did create a surplus, but the wealth gap still increased regardless, based on some of the other things that he did. And one of the biggest reasons for that, this is probably the biggest impact in terms of economic policy when you look at Bill Clinton. He is the president that signed the NAFTA agreement into law. Okay, and if you're unfamiliar with the NAFTA agreement, it is a free trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Do you know what it was designed to eliminate when it came to trade across these different border regions? Tariffs. It did away with tariffs. And this is how it was pitched to the American people, though, and I'd like somebody to try to take a guess on it. How was this pitched to the American people? Why is NAFTA actually going to be a great deal, even for the working class, inside of this country?
It's going to make your goods cheaper.
It's going to make your goods cheaper? So one other reason. I'll show you a quote from Clinton here in a second. I just want to see if anybody can take a guess. Yes, you got it. So you can read it right up here. NAFTA means what? Jobs. We're going to create so many jobs that this is going to be a windfall for the American working class at the end of the day. Which organizations do you think were rightfully skeptical of the NAFTA agreement? Where kind of, unions were like, what are you doing? Okay, because this is not going to work out for us at the end of the day. So you can see Congress be like, jump into the pool. What do you notice about the pool? There's no water there. All right, so the end result of this is not good. So I'm going to skip ahead, but basically this was what NAFTA ultimately leads to. What happened to all these base level manufacturing jobs inside of the United States as a result of this? All outsourced. Why would an American corporation take advantage of the NAFTA agreement and basically ship a lot of our jobs to Mexico in particular? Cheaper labor. It's as simple as that. So this is one of the most damning maps, that I've seen recently. This shows you the impacts of the NAFTA agreement, and this is nuts. What is the difference that you notice from 1990 to 2024 when it comes to who's the top employer in each state? Who did it used to be? What did we used to do in this country? We used to make stuff, and what are those good paying union jobs that we used to have? Those factory jobs. They were, okay? Now they're all gone. And this might look like, I just don't want people to get the wrong impression about this. What's the main top employer now in each state? Healthcare. That sounds nice. Do you know the reason behind that, though? Privatized healthcare. It's all like bureaucrats, basically, inside of the privatized healthcare business that now have, call center jobs and that sort of stuff. Not good paying. So don't get the wrong impression, we replaced it with healthcare. That's not the case at all. And you can see the impacts of this if you want to look at it in graph form. That's how many manufacturing jobs there used to be inside of the United States. You're looking at, upwards of 18 million. That's plummeted now when you get closer to today. And that's all tied back to the NAFTA agreement. And I'll skip over some of this stuff because I don't think it's super interesting. There's a new NAFTA agreement, so this is just continued. So Trump's first presidency, he signed the USMCA, which people just dubbed NAFTA 2.0. So that's just continued. It's really no different than it was. Joe Biden also was a fan of NAFTA, because he was the senator from Delaware during the time period. So that's what I'm trying to explain to you. No major difference when you look at economic policies between these two. And the NAFTA deal is a prime example of economic globalization. And if you want a simple understanding of globalization, look at a cup of Starbucks coffee, for instance. Where do all the ingredients, the materials that you need to make one cup of Starbucks, where do they come from in today's world? All over the planet. Okay, so this is a prime example of economic globalization. Or you look at McDonald's. Where does McDonald's exist today? Has it basically engulfed the United States? Yes, you can see that. It's basically 8 in the US, but yeah, it's all over the place. So that's a great, just easy example of globalization. These corporations now, they exist everywhere. They're not just in their headquartered country anymore. But if you can take a second and think about this, why is globalization, why might it be pretty risky for the working class in particular, both in the US and abroad? You're not protected at all, okay? And it's really a race to the bottom when you get down to the, you're not protected, yeah. And the other big issue here is if one economy stalls out on the world stage, they all do, okay? It's very risky when you look at that sort of stuff and layoffs, etc. And China's obviously taken up the mantle when it comes to manufacturing power, so they've kind of filled that gap. The US used to make stuff. China now has filled that void and starting to progress as a result. And then for the working class, I'd like to show you this. This is a really important cartoon to actually take a second here and understand. This gets to the heart of why these NAFTA agreements, these globalization agreements, these free trade agreements, why are they not great for workers?
There's no workers' rights.
There's no workers' rights where? Anywhere. Okay, workers abroad suffer. They are under brutal conditions for some of these jobs that we've outsourced. And then what happens to American workers back here at home? You're laid off, or you just lost your union job, now go get a private sector job, and good luck. Just figure it out. You're gonna be making minimum wage and trying to piece it together. And we felt the impacts of that here, and I think most people are familiar with this. Can you think of a local example of globalization that really negatively impacted the Utica economy in particular? There used to be a factory, there used to be a plant here. GE. Okay, there used to be a GE plant. What happened to that plant? It's gone. This is what it looks like today. It's just a warehouse. Okay?
Same thing happened in Rome, too.
Absolutely. Rome's another great example. I mean, we live in, you guys know what this area is called. We live in one of the areas of the Rust Belt. We used to manufacture stuff here. We don't. There's a lot of union jobs here. They're gone. And that has obvious, negative economic impacts. And it impacts your school. It impacts all those different things. There's a trickle-down effect of that, which is incredibly negative. And then you look at where our jobs have been outsourced to. So Bangladesh, for instance, you look at some of the wages inside of Bangladesh. You're talking about $90 a month to do very difficult labor under brutal conditions. This is 12 years ago now, which is kind of insane to think about. But a lot of our American companies that have outsourced textile work to Bangladesh in particular. Does anybody remember the Rana Plaza collapse in 2013? One of those factories completely broke, and you see the collapse that took place. There was 1,000 workers that died. They died, and you look at the pictures of this stuff. It's horrific. Young children obviously working inside of these factories as well, but yeah.
I was just going to say, it kind of reminds you of if you know about the early 1900s, late 1800s here, talking about textile factories and the garment factories that women were forced to work in during those times. Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes,
Remember the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire?
Exactly.
That's kind of what a lot of these nations, developing nations around the world, are experiencing when it comes to their conditions. It's like what we experienced during our industrialization time period. It's those horrific conditions with not a lot of union protections. This cartoon's dark, but I think it's on point. Do you get the point? How much are their lives worth? $15 for a cheap shirt. So it's stark. And then the other negative impacts. If you're like a local mom and pop shop here, let's say you're a local bookstore, in a globalized economy, how are you really up against it? Who are you taking on? Who are you competing with? The world. You're taking on Amazon. Do you have a prayer in that fight? And what role, this is also important to point out, what role does the U.S. government play in this political cartoon? Yeah, just the referee, just supposed to play it neutral, and that obviously always benefits a major corporation like Amazon. Now, other impacts of this I think are pretty straightforward, but as a result of globalization, what has probably happened to working class wages here in the United States? Stagnated or dropped. So I'll play you this clip. I think this is really telling, so check this out.
Contrary to popular mythology, globalization and technology haven't really reduced the number of jobs available to Americans. These transformations have reduced their pay. It's not just that wages are stagnating, but when you take into consideration rising costs, the rising cost of rents or homes, dramatically increasing costs of healthcare, the rising costs of childcare, and also the rising costs of higher education, rising much faster than inflation. Take all of these into consideration, and you find that it's much worse than just stagnating wages. It's basically middle-class families, often with two wage earners, working harder and harder and harder and getting nowhere.
I think that's a great summation of what's happened the last 40 years in particular. Do you remember this graph that I showed you last class? You notice, who has globalization been phenomenal for? The wealthy. And what's happened to everybody else's wages? Flatline, or his argument has actually gotten worse because has the cost of everything continued to go up? Yeah, so you look at the end result of globalization, this is pretty drastic in particular. Look at since the 90s, since globalization and those NAFTA agreements really became like the law of the land, how much more money does a typical CEO make compared to their worker now?
Like 100 times more.
Even worse. Almost 300 times what a regular worker makes. So that's why the wealth gap has just ballooned to astronomical levels. And unions obviously have also been destroyed during this process as well, so that's one of the things that's contributed to the wealth gap. One other thing that I want to push back on, and sometimes you hear this argument and it drives me insane. It's like, well, people today aren't actually working as hard as they ever did in the past, so that's why they're not getting ahead. That is total garbage. Look very closely at this graph. This measures worker productivity combined with inflation, okay? Or like hourly compensation, I should say, not inflation, I'm sorry. Have workers continue to produce at a steady rate? Like, are they doing the work that is required of them? What has not kept pace with productivity? Their hourly compensation. So that argument is bunk, okay? That's garbage. Don't accept that. That is not true at all. People are working hard. They're working 2, 3 jobs trying to do whatever they can to get ahead. They're just not getting paid enough. That's the real problem. So you want to focus on that. And then like the COVID pandemic, I mean, this is insane, but it just exacerbated the wealth gap of what we've seen overall. So somebody like Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, their wealth jumped to just ludicrous levels as a result of the pandemic in particular. So just one other thing that I'd like to point to. So end result of this, it's obvious. Globalization has been great for the rich. It's not been great for everybody else. And that's the economy that we live in today. I will skip over this for the sake of time. I'd like to get to a few other things that I want to talk about. I'll skip over Monica Lewinsky. I think everybody's familiar with the scandal and the dress and all that sort of stuff. So
Thank you very
his, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, all that, regardless. Clinton did get impeached, but did he get removed from office? No. Okay, so he stayed as president, but I'll skip over that. I would like you guys to read this, and then I'll get to kind of my final points up here. But these are the fun facts that I have for President Clinton. I hope that you can read this. I know it's kind of small for a lot of you, but there's a few things up here that I think are damning when you look at the Clinton presidency that not a lot of people know. Yeah, all right, I'll read it real quick. I'll just read a couple of them for you. So I'll read the ones that I think are most important. So the first one, this is when he was governor of Arkansas, but to show he was tough on crime during his campaign for president, he executed Ricky Ray Rector, who was a black man, who was so mentally inept that he didn't even know that that he was being executed. And just to drive that point home, he wanted to save the pie from his last meal for the next day. Okay, and Clinton could have had a stay of execution. He didn't, because he wanted to make a statement that he was tough on crime, so that gets to the heart of who he was. The third bullet point is he spoke at Stone Mountain when he announced that he was running for president. Stone Mountain is the birthplace of the Confederacy, and I'll show you a quick picture up here. Stone Mountain, it's a prison today. Why would he take a picture like this to announce his candidacy? What's the clear message that he wants to send? I'm tough on crime, okay, and I'll basically go after African Americans as well. It's a dog whistle. So that's what he was doing there. The other one that I think is incredibly important is he helped pass the Uruguay Accords, which basically allows a company like Disney, for instance, a massive corporation, to retain copyright forever. So like nothing can fall into the public domain, which when like Disney stories, let's take like The Lion King, for instance. The Lion King, it's a ripoff of what classic tale that did fall into the public domain that Disney was able to just reconfigure. It's Hamlet, okay? Yeah, very good. So they just took that, reconfigured it, and now Disney gets to pass it off as their own. What if you want to take a spin on The Lion King? What would you need to do? What would you probably have to give Disney to get that approval? You're going to have to pay them. They're never going to allow you to do that. So that allowed copyright to just maintain into the private sector. It doesn't fall into public domain anymore. That's one of the biggest things that Clinton helped to pass. And there's sad impacts from that. This sucks. But take a look at this. A grieving father for his dying child, for his funeral. What did he want to do up here? He wanted to have Spider-Man on his son's grave who died of a horrific form of cancer. What did Disney step in and say? No, it's copyright. Sorry, we can't do that. Okay, we got to protect our intellectual property. All right, so that's what the Uruguay Accords is. It's sick stuff like this, which is just beyond belief when you really think about it.
Why was it Uruguay?
That's where the agreement was made. Yeah, so that's where they a bunch of nations around the world came together for that. But yeah.
So recently, Winnie the Pooh came into public domain. So how did that happen?
there's like, it only happens very infrequently, and I honestly don't know the ins and outs of it, but you don't see it on a mass scale, because what's supposed to happen is after 50 years of something being out into the public, it's supposed to fall into the public domain, but most properties that doesn't happen with, but there's a few that slip through the cracks, so I don't know.
Is that because it was before the Uruguay Accords?
But all these things were, for the most part, so I don't know, but that's a great question, yeah.
There's a window of time, basically, where they're open to the public, but companies like Disney have like dozens of lawyers already at the gates, ready to like purchase the rights, but it's impossible to catch everything.
Gotcha.
That's just what slips through the cracks.
Okay, yeah, that's a great, thanks for, that's
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I read something, this might be not be true, but there was like a certain time period upcoming where Mickey Mouse would be open to public domain where people can use it, but like Jacob said, immediately Disney's gonna have lawyers on top of it to try and sue people or.
and just come down. Yeah, and make an example out of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, last thing that I want to cover for today, and this is really the biggest thing that I want to cover, so I appreciate you all sticking with me, but one of the most tragic things that happened during Clinton's presidency was the Columbine shooting in Colorado in 1999. But for the Columbine shooting, it happened, like I said, in 1999, it was Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold who were the killers. They killed 11 people inside of their school during this, and this was really kind of like the first mass school shooting that kind of unfortunately set the trend for this to continue to happen into the modern age. But you look at pictures from this directly impacted me because, not directly impacted, I guess that's the wrong word, but I was in high school during this, and this was something that really connected with me.
In Colorado, about 15 minutes from Columbine.
Oh goodness.
School went into closed.
Yeah.
Shut down. I had friends at Columbine.
I could only imagine, like the terror of what, I bet. So Clinton was president during this, but the big thing that I want to try to stress to you, what did the government do in response to this horrific tragedy? Nothing. Okay, this is where you start to get that classic refrain of, what do politicians always say when one of these events happen now? Just thoughts and prayers. That's nice. Is it going to do anything to actually stop this? I'm going to go no. However, the government tried to pass off blame, though, on someone else or something else. Yes, very good. I don't know if people are familiar with the singer Marilyn Manson, who was very popular in the late 90s in particular. Marilyn Manson became the poster boy because Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, they listened to Marilyn Manson. So it was this like evil satanic music that was the thing that actually sparked them to commit this atrocity. And also, these kids played very violent video games. So that's the reason why they went and decided to murder a whole bunch of their classmates and teachers inside of the school. I want to play you a clip from, I don't know if anybody's seen this documentary. It's Bowling for Columbine, great breakdown of the Columbine massacre. And Michael Moore does a really good job here. He actually interviewed Marilyn Manson and got his take on the Columbine shooting. And I would like you to pay attention of what argument is Marilyn Manson making here. And then you tell me, is it a good point, not good point, somewhere in between? But I'll play this for you.
When I was a kid growing up, music was the escape. That's the only thing that had no judgments. You can put on a record and it's not going to yell at you for dressing the way you do. It's going to make you feel better about it.
Some will be so brash to ask if we believe that all who hear Manson tomorrow night will go out and commit violent acts. The answer is no. But does everybody who watches a Lexus ad go and buy a Lexus? No, but a few do.
I definitely can see why they would pick me, because I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV, because I'm, in the end, sort of a poster boy for fear. Because I represent what everyone's afraid of, because I do and say what I want.
If Marilyn Manson can walk into our town and promote hate, violence, suicide, death, drug use, and Columbine-like behavior, I can say, not without a fight you can't.
The two byproducts of that whole tragedy were violence and entertainment and gun control. And how perfect that was the two things that we were going to talk about with the upcoming election. And also then we forgot about Monica Lewinsky, and we forgot about the president was shooting bombs overseas, yet I'm a bad guy. because I've sang some rock and roll songs. And who's a bigger influence, the president or Marilyn Manson?
Do you know,
I'd like to think me, but I'm going to go with the president.
do you know that the day that Columbine happened, the United States dropped more bombs on Kosovo than any other time during that war?
I do know that, and I think that that's really ironic, you know, that nobody said, well, maybe the president had an influence on this violent behavior. No, because that's not the way the media wants to take it and spin and turn it into fear, because then you're watching television, you're watching the news, you're being pumped full of fear. There's floods, there's AIDS, there's murder, cut to commercial, buy the Acura, buy the Colgate. If you have bad breath, they're not going to talk to you. If you got pimples, the girl's not going to fuck you. And it's just this, it's a campaign of fear and consumption. And that's what I think that it's all based on, is the whole idea that keep everyone afraid and they'll consume.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really as simple as it can be boiled down to.
Right. If you were to talk directly to the kids at Columbine or the people in that community, what would you say to them if they were here right now?
I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did.
What is the argument that Marilyn Manson's making? America's violent. And maybe that's a bigger picture issue that we should focus on than a guy that plays some rock and roll songs in particular. Then I really like the last point that he makes as well, is like, I would actually listen to what students have to say. Maybe we should get their input on all this. I think that's a very salient point. And I guess, you know, when you think about it, what does it say about the state of the country that Marilyn Manson has a better response to this than an actual government official? It's pretty sad, all right? And then just to push back against some of the claims that were made in the wake of Columbine, that's what everybody focused on. They listened to Marilyn Manson, they played violent video games. Are there violent video games in every other country on the planet? But what doesn't happen in those countries? There's no mass shootings, okay? So there's a disconnect there. It can't be because of that. And this is one of the saddest graphs that I will show you, but this is how bad this has gotten recently. What is now the #1 cause of death for children ages 1 through 18 inside of this country? It's guns. That's never happened before. It used to be motor vehicle accidents and car crashes. It is now guns. That is the #1 killer of our children. Yeah.
If you notice something too, like all the other things on there, motor vehicle crashes, we made laws to protect people in cars. Suffocation, we made laws for children to make sure that you're like swaddling them appropriately or whatever. But with the guns, there's
been no legislation. That's a great point. Absolutely. So the government can act and do something about this? Sure, but they don't. And school shootings are increasing. So I'll have you take a guess on this, but obviously, have you been desensitized at this point to these shootings that are happening? How many shootings do you think happened just last year, mass shootings?
260 or something.
You're close. Yeah, I mean, it ranges from 200 to 300, especially the past couple years in particular. So we're seeing this even more and more, which is, again, I can't even wrap my head around how sad this actually is. But is this a uniquely American problem? Does it just happen here? Yes. Okay, and that's the question I want to talk about at the end once I wrap up with everything. Why us? Why is this an American problem? Why does this not happen anywhere else? I'd really like to hear people's thoughts on that when we wrap up with everything. But just to drive the point home, it doesn't happen anywhere else, or at least not on the same scale in any way, shape, or form. So you look at this, there's occasionally school shootings in some other countries, but they are very, very few and far between, where unfortunately here they happen almost on a weekly basis at this point.
180 days of school, 288 shootings or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you look at this graph. I know this might be tough to see, but this shows you pretty much the breakdown of gun ownership versus mass shootings. Does the United States have the most guns in the world? Yeah, we also have the most mass shootings, but are there other countries that have a bunch of guns? But what don't they do? Once again, they don't do these school shootings. So like I said, it's a uniquely American problem. And that's why this is really sad to think about. But I mean, myself, my wife, we're both teachers. We experience this, every couple months where we have these drills, and obviously Rain, Peter as well. What do kids in other countries experience inside of school?
Nap time.
Yeah, nap time, kick back and relax and enjoy being a child. Meanwhile, what are our kids doing here? Hiding, duck into a corner. My analogy, it's pretty much exactly like the duck and cover drills from the Cold War. It's the same exact sort of stuff. It's all done to make kids feel like, oh yeah, there's something that you can do to protect yourself during this. Just like, yeah, duck under a table when the nuke goes off and you're going to be fine. It's the exact same thing. So, again, that's what I want you to think about is why us? Now, unfortunately, I'm assuming most people remember this. Do you know which mass school shooting in particular? This totally broke me and made me kind of lose faith that the government was ever going to tackle this issue. I'll talk about both of them, but let's start with the Sandy Hook shooting. This was in 2012. I remember I was teaching during this time period. The reason why this resonated with me so much, what were the ages of the kids that were slaughtered here? They were 6 and 7 years old. Like, my wife and I, we have a 6-year-old. When I look at these kids' pictures, it just, breaks my heart. Like, you can't even believe a parent actually experiencing that or this child experiencing something like that. Now, who was president during the Sandy Hook shooting? Obama. And Obama gave a big press conference, and if you look closely at this image, what did Obama do during this press conference when he spoke on this? He was crying, so that was kind of nice. And he has this big statement about what a tragedy this was, and this is a day that everybody's going to remember. However, what did President Obama actually do in terms of policy after the Sandy Hook shooting? Nothing. Okay, he did absolutely nothing. And why do you think, if you want to pinpoint one, why is this such a big turning point when you look at American history? Why does the Sandy Hook shooting, why does it really matter? Definitely. If there was ever a time for this country to wake up to this issue, was this shooting probably the one where something would actually be done about it? Yeah. Just because of the ages of these children. But nothing happened. And that's what made me realize and really woke me up like, nothing's going to change when it comes to this.
Did he have the Congress backing him up, or was it opposing, the Republicans were opposing?
At this point in 2012, that was right around his second term, so I don't believe he had the support of Congress, but my argument is like the president has the bully pulpit. They have the ability to sway public opinion. Like, you do whatever you need to do. I think sometimes people get kind of limited. It's like, oh, the president doesn't have the support of Congress. What can he actually do? Start a strike. Go out, start a boycott. Do whatever you got to do. Start picketing. Start going around and organizing people to actually take action on this sort of stuff.
Trump doesn't ask anybody.
Yeah, he just goes and does it. Sign an executive order. Exactly. Do whatever you got to do. So yeah.
Didn't you tell us last week that Reagan, this really started me, Reagan had a Democratic Congress.
Yes.
Passed Reaganomics.
But he passed Reaganomics, so what's the holdup here? Do something. But then obviously one that somebody else already mentioned, the Uvalde shooting in Texas in May of 2022. This is the one that I do want to take a deeper dive into because this is, I think, really important to understand ways that this connects to other issues. But the Uvalde shooting was basically a mirror of the Sandy Hook shooting. It was also 6 and 7-year-olds and their 2 teachers that were killed, so 21 victims here in total. But the reason why, besides this horrific tragedy, why people paid very close attention to this as well, what did the Uvalde police do for 40 minutes while children were being systematically executed inside of their classrooms? It's even worse than that, okay? You looked at the security cam footage, and there's actual audio footage of this as well, which I don't recommend that you listen to because you will hear children screaming and crying in the background. I wouldn't do that. But to make things worse, the cops were right down the hallway from the classroom where the murderer was just systematically killing children. If you zoom in on this police officer, take a close look at that. I know it's a little bit grainy, but this, I think, tells you a lot. What is his wallpaper on his phone? And is there a disconnect between that logo on his phone and his actual actions? That's the Punisher's logo. If you're not familiar with comic books, the Punisher is a vigilante who will do anything, break any sort of protocol, break any sort of rule in order to do what? Do right, to bring people to justice. Okay, that's what the Punisher is all about. That's what this guy's background says. What is he actually doing here while children are being killed? Looking at his phone, okay? And like I said, this went on for 40 minutes. There was a child that made a 911 call while she was watching her classmates get killed, and nobody was going in to do anything about it to actually help her. However, there was one group that tried to storm into the building to actually do this. Do you know who was trying to take action and get the cops to actually do their job as well? The parents. Do you know what the cops did when the parents were trying to storm into the building and save their kids? They arrested them. They tasered them. They stopped them from going into the building. Okay, and said, no, we got this. We got this covered. We don't need you in there. And they actually took violent action against these parents to stop them from trying to save their own kids. Do you think there's been any repercussions for the Uvalde police when it comes to their inactivity during this massacre? No.
Well,
Yeah.
and even they blamed it on the teachers because the teacher had a wedge in the door.
Which we found out to be not true.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's what they tried to pin it on. Well, the teacher left the door open, so that's why you can't blame us for this. And that was not true, but that was the story that was going around for like a couple days in the wake of this.
But how stupid is that anyway?
Oh, it's ridiculous. Yeah, but some people eat that up. They're like, oh, well, I guess that makes sense. I guess it is the teacher's fault. Nobody critically thinks. Yes, but there's been, yeah, right. There's been no repercussions. And then the Uvalde police does stuff like this. At the elementary school, they try to recruit inside of the school where they took absolutely no action in, so that's kind of nuts. But do you know why the police will not be held accountable for this and historically are never held accountable?
Because they're thugs for the ruling class that hold their interests.
And there's even another reason beyond that. Yeah.
They don't have to.
Yes.
I can't hear them.
I'll explain it for you. So yeah. Do you believe the police have a constitutional obligation to protect you as an individual if you are in harm's way? What would most Americans say to that question? What do they think? Yes. They think, oh, absolutely. The police, they have a constitutional obligation to protect me. Guess what? They don't. Okay, and there's a couple Supreme Court cases that happened in the past few decades that made that an actual fact. The police have no obligation to protect you. The saddest example of that is the Castle Rock versus Gonzalez case in 2005. This is very dark, but there was a single mother who was separated from her husband. Her name was Jessica. The guy that you see on the right was Simon. They had 3 children together, and then the mother had a 4th child that wasn't actually his, but regardless of that, she was abused by him throughout their marriage. They divorced. He got a restraining order, or she got a restraining order against him. He eventually decided to show up one day and basically kidnap their 3 children and go on a joyride with them. She called the police, said they violated the restraining order. He basically kidnapped our children. Can you do something about this? Guess what the police did? Nothing for 8 hours. He eventually showed up at a police station, got into a shootout with the cops. He was killed, and the 3 children were found dead in the trunk of the car since he had executed them a couple hours prior. Okay? This case, obviously the mother beyond furious for something like this. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court. What did the Supreme Court rule here? Can the police be held accountable for this? Yes or no? No. And the reason for it is the quote that I have up here. What is the thing that the Supreme Court pointed to of why the cops cannot be held accountable for this? There's no what? There's no property interest here, so there's no accountability. And that really became the law of the land in 2005. And it wasn't even a close decision. You know how there's 9 Supreme Court justices? It was a 7-2 decision. So it wasn't even like it was split 5-4. It was 7-2. And that's what kind of gave cops, this might be a term that you're familiar with, of qualified immunity. It really means they can't be held accountable for just about any of their actions. They are, in essence, above the law, I guess is the simplest way to put it. So that's why 99% of the time when there is some sort of suit that's brought against the police, 99% of the time that lawsuit's thrown out, or they're not held accountable. It just doesn't happen. And it's because of those Supreme Court cases and the things that I pointed to. Now, do you know what the police are responsible for protecting? Property. And this, I don't think a lot of people know this either, but yes, police have an obligation to protect private property. Do you know what is the genesis of the modern day U.S. police force? What did they morph out of that will make this make a heck of a lot more sense? Very good. Modern police came out of slave catcher societies. What was the private property that slave catchers? Slaves, enslaved people. Okay, so that's where this all stems from. And that's why when you see pictures like this, what will the cops do for Chase Manhattan Bank? Yeah, they'll fall on the sword. They'll protect that, no problem. Or when the strikes took place, especially, they'll go in and bust heads, do whatever they got to do to break strikes. Remember the Dakota Access Pipeline when Native Americans were trying to protect their sacred land and their water? What did cops do in that case? Yeah, went right in, no problem. So, police have next to no accountability for their actions, yet what percentage of city budgets are typically directed towards the police force? Usually, yeah, it's right around there. So I'll show you Uvalde, for instance. 40% of their budget is dedicated to the police. And if you break that down line by line, you can take a closer look at this. The police get about $4 million out of the $10 million budget inside of their town. What are the things that are kind of ignored that are, I don't know, might be important inside of a town like Uvalde? The arts, streets, infrastructure, basic things like that. Our area of New York is no different. This is the Rochester city budget. When it says public safety, what do you think that means? That's the cops, 40% there as well. That's typically what you see. Do you know why these police budgets are so tilted? Why are they so out of control? Definitely. Sophia, that's a great answer for sure.
Michelle Alexander said the Pentagon started it all.
Excellent. The police buys a ton of their equipment from the Pentagon in these buyback programs. So that's why when you look at stuff like this has escalated, especially the last few years in particular. That's why, what do the police look like today? They look like occupying military. Okay, so you look at the way that they're decked out with Humvees and aircraft and all this sort of stuff. And then this is one of the most insane charts that I will show you. If you look at this on the global scale, if you pool together the money of all the police departments across the United States, do you want to take a guess where they would rank in global military spending?
Within the top 10, isn't ICE have a bigger budget now than
Yeah, this is even worse. This is out of date now because it's from a couple years ago. But if you pull together all the police money inside of the entire country, the American police force would be the third biggest military on the planet, just below the actual United States military and the Chinese military. Okay, so that is, again, pretty crazy to try to wrap your head around. But, I think you get the point that I'm trying to make up here, but it's kind of comes down to this. What are the big picture kind of moral impacts of constructing budgets in this way, especially at the local, municipal, city level, that sort of stuff?
to make people feel like they're going to be safe, but in reality, the police are protecting property and one-class interests.
Definitely. I love this quote from Martin Luther King. Take a second and read through that. What is he arguing is happening to the moral fabric of the country? Security, it's falling apart. Okay, because we're not spending our money on what?
Welfare.
Yeah, these programs of helping people, basic social uplift that is not taking place. I don't know if anybody's, I can't believe I never heard this until a couple of years ago. Do people remember Harry Belafonte? Yeah. So he was a very close associate of MLK. This was Harry Belafonte being interviewed right before, this is afterwards, but he was talking about the day right before MLK was assassinated. And MLK told him something that he never forgot. And I want to see, what you think of it. So let me play this for you.
Last thing Dr. King ever said to me, 5 days, as a matter of fact, before he was murdered, when he was at my home. We just finished a strategy meeting on the Poor People's Campaign. And he seemed quite agitated after what we thought was a very successful gathering and discussion. And he said to me, I said, what's the matter, Martin? You seem very agitated. He said, well, I am. Because I've come upon a thought, but I don't know how to deal with it this moment. I said, well, what is it? He said, we fought long for integration. It looks like we're going to get it. I think we get the laws. He says, but I'm afraid that I've come upon something I don't know quite what to do with. I'm afraid that we're integrating into a burning house. And when we asked for further clarification, Andy Young was with me at that time, my wife, others. He said, America's lost whatever little moral vision it had. Its moral sense has run away from the nation. And a nation that is not governed by morality and moral principles is a nation that's headed for an abyss. And I think black people have been struggling to get into this system, maybe getting into a system that in the final analysis is a Sodom and Gomorrah, will not work. Because its selfish goals, its need for profit, its need for supremacy, its need to be the best has clouded its moral vision. And with no moral vision, no nation can be healthy enough to lead its people anywhere except to destruction.
Are those pretty prophetic words? Yeah. Okay, so that's why there's, this movement's kind of, unfortunately, I think, died out recently, but there was like a defund and invest movement, which people misinterpret. It's basically like just pushing to do what with local budgets and police budgets? Rebalance them so that what actually gets funded up here? Educate, yeah, basic necessities, yeah.
So I just wanted to say that, a lot of people, especially socialists, are following the Zoran Mamdani campaign. A lot of the criticisms that you see mainstream media push against him talks about his since the crack epidemic and the fentanyl epidemic here in America, that instead of investing more into police that are not trained to properly deal with mental health crisis and drug addiction, to take a force of mental health, individuals who are trained directly in mental health and mental health crises, to take these people and relieve the burden from actual police forces to go out and help these people who are in mental health crisis, instead of having police that will further exacerbate the crisis these individuals are in and brutalize them even further.
That's a perfect segue to what I want to kind of wrap up with, because what could you argue might be a much better way of going about tackling those big picture issues that Lou's just highlighted? What might we want to invest more in? Education, healthcare, those basic sorts of things, so you can get ahead of the game before these problems start to spiral out of control, essentially. Because if you look at something like this, the cost of 1 year of NYPD misconduct lawsuits, what could you do with that money instead? You get free buses for every New Yorker for an entire year. Okay, so that's what we're talking about with like reinvesting that sort of money, or you look at budgets as a whole, so like the military budget, for instance, which is part of this. What else could we do with that money? Feed people, cancel student debt, get paid family leave for everyone, homes, basic stuff, so that you don't need these sorts of massive police forces, because people's basic material conditions have actually been met. But last thing that I'll go through here is, how did the federal government respond to the Uvalde school shooting at the end of this? Thoughts and prayers, once again. I want you to read this tweet from President Biden, because remember, Biden was president during the Uvalde shooting.
Taylor Marjorie Greene?
What's up?
Wasn't it Taylor Marjorie Greene who followed this guy who went there?
Oh, I believe so. Yeah, which is very dark. Absolutely. I'll read this tweet for you if you can't see this up here, but these kinds of mass shootings rarely happen elsewhere in the world. Why are we willing to live with this carnage? Why do we keep letting this happen? Where in God's name is our backbone to have the courage to deal with it? It's time to turn this pain into action. That sounds nice. Can you take a second and critically think, why is that lame as hell?
He's the president.
He's the president, but he's acting like what?
Like it's out of his hands.
It's out of my hands. I'm just a regular citizen like you guys. What can I possibly do about it? Let's all just work together. Maybe we can figure this out at the end of the day, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So people look at that sort of stuff, and this is what is disgusting to me. How many people liked this tweet?
10,000.
128,000 people said, yeah, that's right, man, I wish Biden could do something about this. Like, to put it as plainly as possible, people need to wake up. Because that is, when you really critically think, that is absolutely lame as hell. So obviously, could Congress have done something here if they really wanted to? Could the president have done something? And I'll show you an example of how quickly the Congress and the president can act in certain situations. Does everybody remember when Roe v. Wade was overturned?
Yeah.
Of course. So that was 3 years ago as well. Do you remember the protests that happened outside of Supreme Court justices' houses because they were furious about a woman's right to choose being taken away? What do you think Congress did immediately when they saw these protesters begin to show up at Supreme Court justices' houses? What did Congress do? Like this. Sent militarized police and took action and passed a law that basically said, we're going to shut this down immediately. Or, has the government been able to ban TikTok as well? Yeah, they can do that. If Congress wants to act, will they act? Yes. Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to make. That's why, if you just remember one thing from what I talked about today, I know I've shown you this quote multiple times. This is James Madison once again. According to him, the father of the Constitution, what is the whole point of a government in his eyes? Protect the rich from the poor. That's it. Does that make a lot more sense now? When does Congress act? When they need protection themselves, okay? But if it's a regular working class person, good luck. You're on your own. All right, and the last thing, just to drive the point home, U.S. school shootings and the mental health crisis, these are dark graphs, but what are we seeing a massive increase in when you're looking at issues for 8th, 10th, 12th graders? Depression. Does it make sense based on the stuff that I showed you, though? Yeah, okay, so they're really struggling. This, I think, is absolutely nuts. This is like the future that children have to look forward to. This is an estimated percentage of 30-year-olds who are both married and homeowners. How low is that now? Below 15%, so there's no future, and there's all these mass shootings that are happening inside of schools. There's a very dark reality that children are growing up and experiencing. So You look at antidepressant usage, you know, all that sort of stuff, it's through the roof. The United States is at the bottom of this chart. We have the biggest amount of antidepressant usage inside of the world. Teenage antidepressant usage is also escalating at a rapid pace. Suicide rates are increasing. It's this really dark stuff, but I believe it is in some ways tied to these school shootings and the mass violence that we're seeing. So my final thoughts, just to wrap up with this, these are what I see as potential solutions. I'd be very curious to hear other people's thoughts, but like the basic stuff, like obviously stricter gun laws that have like 70 to 90% of public support when it comes to universal background checks or an assault weapons ban. That stuff's very basic that you think Congress would be able to pass, but they haven't. And then I think the last few points are maybe even more important in some ways. Why might universal health care or free public college and tuition, why might that address these issues as well? They'll get ahead of their issues, and will kids actually see like a way forward, a future? Yes. Yes, they'll have hope, which has just been, you know, eradicated at this point in time. So those sorts of things I think would go a long way. So the last thing that I really would like to hear people's thoughts on, I know we're going a little bit over time, so I get it if you need to leave, but I would like people to maybe just sit and think for a couple of minutes for some of these questions that I have related to school shootings. I really want to hear people's thoughts on number one in particular. Why is this a uniquely American problem? I'm very curious to hear people's thoughts based on the stuff that I presented. Why does it only happen here? You know, number two is obvious. Why do you think the government does next to nothing? I think I made my point on that. But what do you see as the solution to this? And if you have any other questions. So if you'd like to take a couple minutes, maybe think about those questions. They're on the back of the handout that I gave you. I'd be curious to have people kind of ruminate on those for a little bit, and then you know, try to offer up their thoughts to wrap up for today. So if you need to leave, I totally get it. I really appreciate you sticking around. If you'd like to stay for a brief discussion and a Q&A afterwards, that would be great as well. Like I said, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on all this stuff. All right, last thing is just if you are going to attend next week, we're going to shoot for next Monday. There's donations up here as well for the other side. Thank you again to them for hosting me. The PSL in the back, if you want to take a look at their political program. And just, again, if you're going to leave, I just want to say thank you very much. It really means a lot to me to continue to get this turnout week after week. It's just really heartening to see. So thank you very much. And if you want to stick around for discussion, we'll be back in a couple minutes. All right? Thank you. I switched it for Monday, yeah.